In the America of the 1950s, a land that proudly called itself the home of the free, there was still a cruel truth etched into every bus seat, every lunch counter, every water fountain divided by signs that read, colored and white. A truth that told millions of Black Americans that their skin determined their worth, that their voices could be silenced, that their dignity could be stolen. But history is never shaped only by those whose names make it into textbooks. Sometimes it is bent by the defiance of the young, the overlooked, the forgotten. And before Rosa Parks made her legendary stand in Montgomery, there was another, a teenage girl whose courage came not from years of planning but from the fire of injustice burning too hot to contain. And her name was Claudette Colvin, just 15 years old, living in Montgomery, Alabama, a girl navigating school, church, and a world where second-class citizenship was demanded of her. But on March 2, 1955, 9 months before Rosa Parks would refuse to give up her seat, Claudette made a choice that would mark her forever. A choice born in a moment when a bus driver ordered her to rise, to stand, to surrender her seat to a white passenger. And in that split second, with the weight of generations pressing down, Claudette said no, not in a whisper, not in hesitation, but with the full force of her young spirit. She refused. And in that refusal, the bus went silent. Eyes turned. Tension crackled in the air. Because in Montgomery in the Deep South, a Black girl defying the system was more than rebellion. It was dangerous. It was life-threatening. It was unthinkable. But Claudette held her ground, her hands clutching the seat, her heart pounding, remembering the lessons of her teachers who spoke of Black history, remembering Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, remembering that dignity could not always wait for permission. And as the driver called the police, as white passengers grumbled in outrage, Claudette sat firm. And when the police boarded, dragging her off the bus, handcuffing her like a criminal, she shouted that her constitutional rights were being violated. Imagine the sight. A 15-year-old girl in pigtails crying out against a system centuries old. And yet that moment, that act of courage, was not the climax of applause and support but a storm of consequences. For Claudette was arrested, charged, and thrown into jail. A child treated as a threat. And though her community was inspired, though some saw in her the spark of a movement, the civil rights leaders hesitated, they worried, they calculated. They wondered if this teenager, poor dark-skinned from a working-class family, was the right face for the fight. They judged her too young, too unpolished, later scandalized by her personal life when she became pregnant as an unwed teen. And so Claudette's act of rebellion was quietly pushed aside, buried in the shadow of Rosa Parks, who 9 months later would make the same refusal, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott and earning her place in history. But make no mistake, Claudette's defiance had lit the fuse. Her case was one of the 4 used in the landmark Browder v. Gale lawsuit that ultimately struck down bus segregation. Her bravery became a cornerstone of the legal victory, even if her name was not the one emblazoned in headlines. And here lies the climax of her story. Not the arrest itself, but the cruel twist of history that a teenage girl's courage could shake the walls of injustice yet leave her standing in the shadows, unrecognized, unsung. A reminder that movements are not made by one face, one voice, one hero, but by countless acts of defiance, some celebrated, some forgotten. And in the decades that followed, Claudette lived with that duality, carrying the pride of her stand and the pain of her erasure, working quietly as a nurse, raising her children, her story barely whispered while the world praised others, until slowly, years later, recognition began to come. Historians began to uncover the fuller truth. Documentaries told her name, and Claudette herself finally spoke, reminding us that change often comes not from polished leaders, but from the raw courage of the young, the overlooked, the ones history almost erases. And so when we speak of Rosa Parks, as we must also remember Claudette Colvin, the teenager who defied segregation before Rosa Parks, because her stand was no less heroic, her risk no less real, her impact no less vital, and her legacy no less deserving. And the ending of her story is not silence but resurgence. For Claudette is proof that every act of courage matters, that history is made not only by the names we know but by the voices once ignored. And when you imagine her sitting on that bus, clutching that seat, refusing to move, remember that courage does not always wait for the perfect moment or the perfect messenger. Sometimes it erupts from the heart of a child who has simply had enough. And that perhaps is the purest form of defiance, the kind that cannot be scripted or planned, the kind that tells the world in one simple word: no. And in that, no echoes the possibility of freedom, the spark of a movement, the heartbeat of justice, a heartbeat that still resonates today, reminding us that Claudette Colvin was not a footnote, not a shadow, but a pioneer, a hero whose story deserves to be told as loudly, as proudly, and as defiantly as the day she first refused to give up her seat.